In this video, you're going to take just a few minutes to create a much better experience for mobile users. So when we're testing for mobile, it's not enough to just make our browser skinny because things are actually rendered a little differently. What we're going to do instead is use the device simulation tool that Chrome has built in. You can access it right here by clicking Toggle Device Toolbar. This is going to give us a better idea of what our application is actually going to look like on a wide variety of devices. And if I toggle that, you can see we have the option between iPhone devices, we have some Google devices. I'm just going to stick with the iPhone 5. And you'll notice right here, we're getting that real zoomed out look. That's indicative of a website that hasn't been optimized for mobile. If you pull up a really old government website on your phone, you're going to see something just like this, where the page is really zoomed out and you have to zoom in on the individual pieces in order to even read the text. That's because with mobile devices, we have that virtual viewport. So it's using the iPhone default value of 980 pixels. It's then taking that and trying to fit it into 320 pixels, which results in it being zoomed out real far, about 3 times zoomed out. What we need to do is fix that. We want to tell the iPhone device in this case, or an Android device, that we want to use the device's actual width as the width for our content. We want to change that 980 pixel default to whatever the browser width is. In this case, it's 320. If I were to switch to the iPhone 6, it would be 375. We're going to get that done with a viewport tag. I'm going to go ahead and close down all of the files we have open so far and crack open index.html, a file we haven't touched in a long time. And we're just going to come here to set up another meta tag. We're going to be specifying name and content, kind of like key value pairs. So the thing we're trying to set is the viewport. This allows us to configure the viewport, which is going to allow us to fix those issues we just saw. And over here, we have access to a bunch of key value pairs. So that's key equal value. And then we can have a comma separated list of other key equals other value. Now, the ones that we're going to be setting are just 2. The first one is called width, and we're going to set this equal to device width. That is going to override that 980 pixel default on iOS devices, and for most Android devices, it's somewhere around 800 pixels. And we're also going to start the initial scale at 1. When we set this up, we're going to be telling the viewport to actually use the real device's width. So if I save index.html and refresh the application, the end result is an app that looks more like what we would expect. Things are now zoomed in correctly, and when we switch devices, it automatically scales going off of the actual device's width. So now that we have this in place, we can take a look at some actual mobile considerations. For our purposes, we're just going to be making a few tweaks. We're going to reduce some of the spacing in here, and we're also going to switch this form. On mobile screens, we're going to have the input take up the whole width, and we'll also have the button take up the whole width down below. Everything inside of the modal looks good, so there's no need to make any tweaks there. Let's go ahead and actually start off with the form. That code lives inside of add option. What we're going to do is set it up so the input and the button stack vertically on mobile devices. We'll be getting that done by using media queries. So down at the bottom of the file, I'm going to set one up using @media, which is a CSS feature, not a Sass feature. I'm then going to set up the condition. We'll focus on that in a moment, and the curly braces. So the condition is going to be max width, setting that equal to : 45 REM. So this is going to say, hey, up until 45 REMs, apply these styles. So the max width we want to apply these styles at is 45 REM, which means it's going to show up for small devices less than this wide. We can go ahead and mess around with this by setting the universal selector up, and we're just going to set the color equal to red. Now, if I save the add option partial over inside of the browser, we can see that on this small screen, we have the red color showing up. And if I get rid of the small screen by removing the device simulation, we can see the text is no longer red. As we hit that breakpoint, the text color changes. So what we're going to do is actually flip this on its head. Instead of max width, we're going to use min width. This is going to say, hey, we want to apply these styles at a minimum width of 45. So between 45 REM and infinity REM, we're going to make sure the color is red. For devices less than 45 REM wide, we're going to not apply these styles. What's the result? The result is that on large screens, we have red. On small screens, we have white. Now that we have this set up, we have a way to conditionally add those styles, and we can start focusing on more meaningful things than just setting the color to red. Up above for add option, what we're going to do is set one more Flexbox related property. This one is called flex direction. Now by default, flex direction is row, which is why we see our items stacked left to right. But we also have the option to set it equal to column. That is going to stack things vertically, which is exactly what we want for mobile devices. So right here, we can see that while things aren't perfect, they are headed in the right direction. We have the input above the button. Now, as I get to a wider screen and a smaller screen, nothing changes. That's because we haven't provided anything down below. So in the media query, we're going to target add option, and we're going to go ahead and set flex direction equal to row. So for large devices, we're going to have things left to right. For small devices, we'll be stacking things. So now we have our normal setup, and as we hit that breakpoint, we can see these styles are applied. Now there are a couple tweaks we're going to make. We're going to put some space below the input, and we're also going to get rid of that margin that's currently sitting over here. And we can do all of that by tweaking the add option input element. Down below, we currently have our margin right. I'm going to go ahead and comment that out for the moment. So what we're going to do for small screens is just set a margin on the bottom. We don't want that margin on the right since things are stacked vertically. So we're going to set margin equal to 0 on the top, 0 on the right. On the bottom, we'll use the small size variable. And on the left, we'll once again use 0. Now this is going to set things up correctly for mobile devices. So right here, we can see we're no longer getting that weird space on the right-hand side, and we now have some space between the input and the button below. All we have to do is tweak the margin down below for those larger devices by targeting add option, input, setting the margin equal to what we had before. So we had 0 on the top. We had on the right the value of small size. Then we had 0 on the bottom, and we had 0 on the left. This is when things are stacked left to right. We can go ahead and save the add option partial over in the browser for small screens. Things look the same. As we increase the size and hit that breakpoint, we adjust the margins and everything looks great. They're stacked left to right, and we have the appropriate space here, and we've removed the space that was down below, which is something we don't want for those larger devices. So there we go. We were able to set up a simple media query to create some mobile specific styles for our application. Now we're going to get to a challenge in just a moment. Before we do, let's go ahead and just take this and break it out into a variable. So instead of using 45 REM here, we're going to reference a variable that we'll define in just a moment. We can call that one desktop breakpoint, and then we can just set that up. I'm going to wait to save this file until the variable actually exists. Over here, we can create that under the spacing section, desktop breakpoint, and we will set that equal to the same value we just had, 45 REM. Now we can save the settings file. The variable will be defined. We can then save the add option file, and the end result is going to be the exact same thing showing up. So for small screens and large screens, we are getting the correct styles. Now it is going to be your turn to get something done related to the styles. What you're going to be doing is removing some of the excess space between the button and the headers right here when we're on mobile screens. So currently, if we crack open header and button, we can see we're using the XL size for margin bottom right here and right here. Now that's fine for large devices, but for smaller devices, we're going to go ahead and reduce that. And that's going to be your challenge. So you're going to tweak both of those locations. You're going to use M size for small screens and XL size for large screens. That means that you're going to be setting up a media query. You're going to be writing styles for small screens. And then in the media query, you're going to write styles for large screens. You want to tweak the margin bottom for header in this file, and you want to tweak the margin bottom for big button in this file. And when you're done, just go ahead and test your work by reducing the size of the browser. We should see the size still exists. It's just a little smaller in both of these locations. And as we hit the breakpoint, we should see the size exactly as it currently stands. So take some time to knock that one out, test your work, and when you're done, click play. All right, how'd that one go? We're going to set up media queries in both of these files to tackle that, starting with @media at the bottom of the header partial. The condition is a minimum width, min width, of the breakpoint value we just set up. That is desktop breakpoint. Now, what do we want to do when we get past that breakpoint? We're going to go ahead and tweak the styles. We're going to be targeting header, and we're going to be setting margin bottom equal to the XL size variable. For small screens, we no longer want XL size, we want M size. I can go ahead and save the header partial and test my work. We can see that the size hasn't changed because we are on a larger screen. As I get smaller though, the size does reduce, which is fantastic. Let's go ahead and remove that comment and do the exact same thing for big button. Over here, what I'm going to do is set this equal to M size by default. Then we can go ahead and at the end of the big button styles, set up our media query, targeting the minimum width of desktop breakpoint. And once we have hit that breakpoint, we're just going to tweak big button. We're going to set the margin bottom equal to XL size. Now, if we save the file, we should see the smaller size since we are on a mobile device in terms of screen size. And if we increase it, it does jump up. And the exact same thing is true over in the simulation. We have the reduced space here, and down below, we still have our stacked inputs. So that is it for the Indecision app. We have all of the styles in place. In this video, we added the viewport meta tag to correctly render things. And we also set up media queries to add some mobile and desktop specific styles. And the end result is an application that is completely styled. All of the stuff we see here, as well as the conditional stuff like the modal, the error message, and the empty list message. Regardless of what state you get the application into, it knows how to render itself correctly on mobile and desktop devices. That's it for the video. That is it for this section. The styles are in place, and that is it for this part. This is the end of part 1. Part 1 was focused on the fundamentals of React. Well, we can see React does do a lot of stuff. There's also a lot of stuff that real-world apps need that it doesn't do. So that's what we're going to focus on in part 2. We're going to focus on more user interaction. We're going to focus on client-side routing. We're going to focus on authentication and data storage. Part 2 is where we're really going to take the fundamentals and expand on them to create real-world production applications. Now, I do recommend keeping this code around because you are going to revisit this a little bit later in the course. For example, eventually, we're going to take the app we build in part 2 and deploy it. It'll be your challenge to use those same tools and techniques to deploy this application. So don't delete the code. I recommend leaving it around inside of the folder. We'll be revisiting it in just a few sections. For now, though, let's go ahead and look at an introduction to part 2.